Hi, I'm Brendan Mills and welcome to episode 12 of Finance Coach TV, you and your business's finance coach. So, last few episodes we've broken down the components which make up a balance sheet, and today we're going to look at the main component that we're in business, which is revenue, and that's the income that we produce from doing what we do, and that's the main part of your of your profit and loss. So that's what we're going to start looking at over this episode and next episode are the two main components that make up your profit and loss statement. So like what we discussed previously, you got your balance sheet and you've also got your profit and loss statement. Today, revenue. Pretty straightforward, but really important that you know a few key terms and what a couple of things mean to you and your business, just in case, because you can still, even though it's the easiest thing to understand from an accounting and finance perspective, because we're all familiar with revenue, there's a few things that can still trip you up a little bit. So, what is revenue? So, revenue is income derived by a business, a very accountancy type definition. It's also referred to as turnover. So, income derived by business, how would I tell, or what would be the cleanest way to describe that to you in terms of not being too techno jargon? It's money that you earn or income that you receive as a result of doing what you do in your business. Again, a very ambiguous type term, but I think you're with me on the context of which I'm coming from with that. So there's a few different examples that I want to touch on. But one thing before we look at some examples of what revenue is in your business is to understand, well, at what point does it become revenue? And this is where people can get tripped up. From a financial perspective, there are two types of accounting. There's cash and there's accruals. Your business is more than likely going to be running on an accruals type basis. And in the coming weeks, we're going to touch on that. So like what I said previously, I'm not trying to turn you into an accountant. Don't get worried. I'm not going to turn you into a bookkeeper, but just some key concepts that you need to understand. So from a revenue perspective, revenue is actually derived by your business or the turnover generated when an invoice is generated or produced to a client. So for example, if I'm doing consulting work and I invoice a client, that's when the revenue is derived. Not when they pay it, when I actually raise that invoice. The same thing when I go to a grocery store, for example, even though I pay there at that point in time, the income for them or the revenue is derived actually when they print the docket out or when they're transacting that transaction. So that's a really important thing to understand, that it's not when the money is received, it's actually when the invoice is generated from a financial perspective is when that income is generated. So I'm not going to go down the legal path because lawyers might have a different argument of actually when the income is generated is when the actual work is done. But for our perspective, it's really important just to recognize that it's when your invoice is generated, not when you're paid. So some examples of revenue. Pretty straightforward, but I still want to touch on them. The first one is you're selling a product, it's the sale of your product. So if I'm selling men's business shirts, if I sell a men's business shirt, that's revenue. The invoice I generate from that, that's my revenue. If I'm providing a service, if I'm doing, accounting service, consulting services, an architecture business, when I provide those services and generate the invoice for them, that's me generating revenue. Other activities, now that's not, drug dealing or selling or anything like that, or activities on the side. It's actually things which aren't necessarily part of what you do as a business, or not the reason why you're in business, but you still generate revenue from them. So examples here, an insurance payout, so you might have a claim against an insurance company. When they provide you the revenue for that, that's actually part of your income and your revenue as a business. Another example is if you sell an asset. So let's say your business owns a car and you decide to sell that car, that revenue again forms part of your profit and loss. But as we'll see in the coming weeks, selling of products or services, depending on what type of business you're in, is going to be treated differently in the profit and loss compared to what other activities would be, such as insurance payouts and selling of assets. So in today's episode, not much for you to take away in terms of practical application, but just make sure you've got a strong understanding of when income is actually derived for your business, because it's really important to understand. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.